Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, Burnout and Balance Coach and Wellness Expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited about our guest today. I have my friend and my fellow certified Naked Mind coach, Emily Lynn Paulson, with me today. Emily is a writer and a speaker, a certified Naked Mind coach, a She Recovers designated coach, and a member of the long-term recovery community. Emily's been sober since January 2nd of 2017 and has appeared on numerous media outlets, including The Doctors, Parade, Today Parents, and USA Today, discussing how to end the shame and stigma of mental health and substance abuse. Emily's the author of an amazing memoir called Highlight Reel: Finding Honesty and Recovery Beyond the Filtered Life, and a contributor to a new collection of stories called the Addiction Diaries, Stories of Darkness, Hope, and All That Falls in Between. I've read that one too. It's also amazing. Your essay in there, Emily, was very moving. She lives in Seattle with her husband and her 5 children. I feel like I have to say 5 children in itself is an accomplishment. That could just be your bio. Emily and I met through the This Naked Mind certification that we both did together this year. We worked closely together for 6 months. We were in a small group together, so we got to know each other really well. I'm such a big fan of Emily's, and I'm so happy that she's here today. Yes, I think we're going to have a really great conversation. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here with you.
So before we get started, Emily, everybody knows your story, or a lot of people do, and you're going to share that with us today. But what everybody does not know, I don't think, who's listening to this podcast, is that I have in fact been alcohol-free myself for the last almost 3 years now. And I'm not going to talk about that in any detail today, but I just wanted to set that as the backdrop for this conversation. If anybody who's listening is curious to hear my story, you can go and listen to episode 305 of the This Naked Mind podcast, where I was interviewed by Annie Grace, or you can go to my website because my story is on there as well. And I also want to be clear that this interview and this podcast is not an anti-alcohol podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're starting to sweat because you like a glass of red wine at the end of the day, I don't want you to turn it off. I want you to keep listening. The objective is not to get everybody to stop drinking. My objective is to just increase mindfulness around alcohol and in particular women's drinking and some of the patterns that we are seeing develop around women and their relationship with alcohol. There are lots of people out there who can drink moderately. How do I know that? Because I used to be one of them, but then I wasn't, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I think there are, a couple of reasons why alcohol can be such a slippery slope for women. One of them is the fact that alcohol is such a dangerous, addictive substance, and we really don't give it, enough. We don't treat it with the caution that it deserves. And the second piece, which is what I think Emily and I are really going to dig into today, is the fact that we're normalizing drinking for women in a really dangerous way. And that's happening partly as a result of the brilliant marketing by the alcohol industry, but also it's being fueled through our own social media feeds. And I know that I myself was at one time part of that. And I think, Emily, you'll agree that you probably were too.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that and how we feel about it now. So keep your minds open and enjoy my conversation with Emily. So Emily, can you start by just kind of giving us your story around how you came to sobriety?
Yeah, for sure. So I was a person who, alcohol came up a lot through my life. I drank early, and I think looking back, I can see how it started. I can see the pattern. I can see, I drank because of, to cover up trauma, to cover up pain, to relate to people. And I think we'll talk about this a lot later, I'm sure. Looking at the reasons why you're drinking is almost more important than what, why, or how much you're drinking to begin with. But all that to say, I drank like a normal teenager, I thought. I drank like a normal college student, I thought. Of course, I was binge drinking, but I never considered my drinking problematic because I was around people who were doing the same thing. And it waxed and waned over the years. And as an adult, I drank like my friends. And sure, things happened when I drank sometimes that, got in fights with a boyfriend, or I, got upset over things, or got in a fight with a friend, or I might like black out or something, but it didn't happen all the time. It seemed like it happened normally. And I also, there were other friends who the same thing would happen. And again, then my drinking would kind of go up and down. I never really felt like I needed to drink every day. So I never thought it was a problem. And then I became a mom, and I was able to quit, for 9 months, 5 times with every kid. And even when they were newborns, I would drink maybe a beer a night or something. So I felt like my drinking was very normal. And the fact that I could stop so often convinced me personally that I did not have a problem. And I also didn't come from an alcoholic family. Neither of my parents drank. I think my mom drank at my wedding for the first time. And, so it just wasn't a part of what I thought was in my DNA. It didn't look like what I thought a problematic drinker looks like. But when I was a mom, that's when it really escalated. The problematic part of it, that's when the play dates with wine started happening. And so normalizing drinking at 10 a.m., normalizing drinking at 10 a.m. on a Saturday play date would then make me think, it's okay to do at home too. What's wrong with mimosas in the morning, really? And then being able to use it as a stress relief. That's what it really became. It became this Band-Aid for when I was feeling stressed, for when I was feeling anxious. And unfortunately, alcohol doesn't really help with any of those things. It helps temporarily, but the anxiety always increases. So I had constant anxiety. I had depression. And this just kind of kept escalating. And then once my kids were a little older and I had a little more freedom, I became really, really dependent. So it went from that very gray area of drinking where I felt like I was in control of it. It wasn't really driving anything. And it got to the point where I was drinking before I went out. I was drinking when I got home. I was drinking at home alone. I was drinking every day, a bottle or two a night. And so finally, got to the point where I did start having those rock bottoms. Those things that I said, well, I must not be an alcoholic because I've never gotten a DUI. I've never gotten in trouble with the law. I've never had problems with my marriage, never had problems at work. And I looked like this high functioning person. I had 5 kids. I was successful. I was always told like, oh, how do you do everything? I was that person. Like, how do you do it all? So I thought couldn't be a problem until I got a DUI, until I landed in the hospital, until all of these things started happening. And finally, I tried to stop many times on my own. And I did finally end up going to AA. And I just had to stop. There was, like you said, like there was a time when I could have a drink, and that went away. Then it was 2, and then it was 3, and then it was the whole bottle. So I was in that gray area for a while, and it just kept going. And so I've been alcohol-free for 4 years. And, I started in AA, and I just wanted to learn more. I started reading a lot, a lot of quit lit. I started writing, ended up writing my own story. And through that process, excuse me, I went through certification to become a recovery coach. I took addiction and recovery courses. I just wanted to learn as much as possible. And I consider myself kind of an accidental recovery coach because as I did that and my book came out, I realized I really liked working with other women who were questioning their drinking. And so I've been a recovery coach. And then I met you through the Naked Mind recovery certification because when I found Annie's book, I felt like that was a game changer for me, just learning more of the science behind drinking and how it's really not your fault and not my fault, and that it's an addictive substance. I think that's just so freeing for people. And now I'm here with you talking on your podcast.
Awesome. That's Emily's story in like 5 minutes. And honestly, I can't encourage people enough to to get a copy of Highlight Reel and read it, because it's such an incredibly raw and honest telling of your story. And I read it before I knew you. And then I met you afterwards, which was a delight. So I felt like when I met you, I already knew you. But thank you for sharing that in a nutshell. And I do want to talk about a couple of things that you just mentioned. I want to talk about, I think it's the perfect time to talk about this idea of alcohol as self-medication. This is something that you and I have talked about. We actually talked about this yesterday in a meeting that we were in. But one of the things that I get asked a lot from my clients, and my guess is you get asked a lot as well, is this question of like, why is it that so many people seem to be able to drink moderately and they seem to be able to take or leave alcohol? It doesn't seem to become a problem for them. And that was certainly something that I wondered too, like, how did I get to this place? I'm such a, really kind of successful, smart person all in all. Like, I kind of had my crap together everywhere else, but this was one area where it felt like it was really outside of my control. And I had a really hard time reconciling that. And I actually think that that was probably one of the reasons why it took me so long to make the decision to really like throw everything at it. And the answer I always give women is the explanation that Annie Grace gave us, really, which is this: it's that, alcohol, you can moderate alcohol and kind of take it or leave it until really you get to the point where you make the first decision to use it as a way to self-medicate, which could mean as a way to escape, as a way to numb, as a way to cope, as a way to relax, as a way to sleep, as a way to have sex. All of those things are reasons, are really fall under, in my opinion anyway, fall under that kind of bracket of self-medication. And when you flip that switch and you start using alcohol for the first time for that, that's when you really start going down that slippery slope, in my opinion. So what was your experience with, when that switch flipped for you? When and how did you start using it as a form of self-medication?
Well, looking back, again, hindsight's 2020. When you look back, and once I did start within my sobriety journey, that's what I did, was like, how the hell did I get here? When did this turn problematic? And I could rewind, and honestly, from that first drink, I understood that it could numb, it could take pain away, it could make me feel more connected, although it disconnects, but it made me believe that I was more fun, more happy, more relaxed, made me believe those things. So I used it as self-medication probably from the first drink. Now, were there still times when I just had a beer or, and didn't use it for those purposes? Sure. But for the majority, I started out that way. And so through my whole history, it really was a tool for me. And that's why it is such a slippery slope, because even if you're using a glass of wine to relax you and you believe that it relaxes you, when it doesn't, then you feel like, well, maybe I just need 2, or maybe I need 3. And then you're in this slippery slope of you're becoming addicted. You're just becoming dependent on a dependent substance. And so when I work with women, that's one thing I like to point out is A, it's not your fault for getting addicted to an addictive substance. And B, look at the reasons you're taking the drink. And I tell people when I work with them, like, I'm never going to tell you not to drink. Like, that's not my job. Like, you're here because you're reevaluating your relationship with alcohol. So when you do, if you do, ask yourself, why am I drinking this? Why did I just pour this glass of wine? Is it because it makes my steak taste better? Or I believe it makes my steak taste better? Because that's a whole different conversation in your brain than I may sell one of my kids if I don't drink this. Like, if you're using it as a way to fix, or if you're just using it to enhance, or, the reason behind your drinking is always so much more important than actually taking the drink. And so just noting it and not judging it, and just like, okay, so before you drink that, notice, like, why are you drinking it? Okay, well, I'm drinking this because I want to relax. I want to take the edge off. And notice in 20 minutes, maybe that edge is gone. How about after that? What happened after that? Did you feel better or worse? Did you go get another glass? How did you feel in the morning? And really unraveling those, oh gosh, when I really take a look at it, yeah, it relaxed me for 15, 20 minutes. And then my anxiety came back. And then in the morning it was worse. And I was dehydrated and I was hungover and. And so it's all about just peeling back the reasons that you're drinking and kind of undoing some of those beliefs that we have that are not true.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. I think that's the mindfulness piece that I'm so interested in trying to just advocate. I just want people to start getting
Mhm.
mindful around it, to start paying attention, because I think it's really easy to drink for a very long time and justify it with the whole like, I'm just doing this to be social, or because it makes mistake taste better. And I think that it's, that's just I think it's a human tendency. We just fall into the easiest, most, least friction causing
Mhm.
explanation for why we do things. And so a lot of that's certainly where I found myself. I never really questioned it in terms of thinking like, why am I doing this? What's the reason behind this? In fact, I did not do that until I stopped drinking. That was the first time I really thought that through. I mean, I think I was, vaguely aware of the fact that I was using it like to get out of Dodge. That's how I always
Mhm.
describe it. It was like, just get me out of here. But I really didn't spend a lot of time getting curious or mindful around it. And that's the thing that I know I love the most about the This Naked Mind approach to freedom from alcohol. Um, and I want to ask you a little bit about that, because you, as you just said, you started out in AA, and that helped you get sober and
Mhm.
probably saved your life in many ways.
Mhm.
Um, and how long was it after that that you discovered This Naked Mind?
So I was sober 2 years when I read her book. And I already, I worked the program, and, there's a saying in AA, like, take what works and leave the rest. And I really believe that to be true in any program. Like, I welcome all pathways and patchworks of recovery. But I felt very strong in my sobriety. I felt like this was my path. This is what I was doing. And this was something unique to me and other alcoholics, right? And then once I read her book, it almost made me angry how many things I still believed. And also the insidious nature of the marketing, and how many of those messages I still carried with me. And it also freed me in a way to realize, wow, this isn't something that has taken my power away. I really have, I can take that power back. And, the knowledge was so powerful for me. So, yeah, it was 2 years in. And I remember actually I was going to a friend's 5-year sobriety event, her coin ceremony in AA. And I was listening to it on the way, about 2 hour drive. And the whole time I was just like, my mind is blown. My mind is completely blown. And it changed a lot of things for me for the better. And it doesn't detract from what I get from AA. And I still have a home group, and I still virtually attend. Because it's so important to me to support and recognize what has helped me along the way. But I also recognize that it doesn't have to be that way for everybody, and that you don't have to ever say you're an alcoholic. You don't ever have to get to rock bottom. You don't ever have to quit drinking 100%. It's all about recognizing that when you do drink, or when you walk by the aisle and you see all that messaging, that you see it for what it is, and don't just blindly buy into it.
Yeah, yeah, that's so great. And I had the same experience with it, I think, So for people who are listening to this podcast, there are probably people who don't know what This Naked Mind is. So I should just let people know what we're talking about. So This Naked Mind is a book that was written by a woman called Annie Grace. And it is effectively, it's a collection, the collected story of her own research. Thank you, Emily.
Here it
Emily
is, right
demonstrating
here.
for anyone who's watching, the podcast. Um, it's it's available as a written book, but it's also available on Audible. I happened to listen to it in a car one day. I was driving to get an MRI, and I had a 4-hour drive to the MRI and a 4-hour drive back. And I just randomly, I don't know, it was just the alignment of the stars that day, that I decided to download for the first time in my life an audiobook. I had never downloaded an audiobook. And this is the one I chose. I was at a point where I was very, very much questioning my relationship with alcohol, as Emily was just kind of intimating. I was the person who was not identifying as an alcoholic. So, I was somebody who did not identify as an alcoholic. I'd in fact gone online and taken the test many times in the middle of the night when I was up feeling very anxious about the fact that I had wine to drink the night before, when I had made a decision that I wasn't going to have wine. And so I was beating myself up over that. And I was getting up, as I got into a pattern of doing it, like 3 a.m, and getting on the internet and going down the rabbit hole. And I did that test many times, and I did not meet the test for an alcoholic. I just never met it. And I've said this before. I kind of was hoping I would. one of those times, because that would have been the thing that would have told me, okay, now it's a problem and you should do something different. And I didn't get that. I didn't get that feedback. But when I listened to This Naked Mind, the thing that was the most freeing for me about the book was the real focus on, it's not about a definition. There really isn't a clinical definition of an alcoholic. If you go see a doctor, they're probably going to tell you to decide for yourself after you look at the factors and do the quiz. So it's, there is no real definition of that. And I don't care what people call me. I don't care what people call themselves, but I personally did not identify with the definition of alcoholic. And that was problematic for me because I was looking for that to actually be the reason to make the change. And when I listened to the book, the focus on the idea that what really matters is your subjective view on it. So how you feel as a person about your relationship with alcohol. Are you at a place where you're questioning it? Are you thinking about it all the time? I mean, that's the first sign, right? Like if you're actually thinking about whether it's a good thing anymore, that's a sign that maybe it's not such a great thing. You don't need to be doing the test for, am I an alcoholic? You might be doing what I also used to do, which is Google, like, how to moderate. How can I moderate? Many times you probably have come up with some rules for yourself, and you've done like a bunch of dry, streaks, and you've been on every cleanse out there. Although my favorite story about cleanses, I don't know if you've ever done cleanses, but back in the heyday, when I was, before I knew anything about nutrition and wellness, I used to do this crazy cleanse for 14 days where I would eliminate, all the sugar, all the dairy, all the gluten, all the whatever.
Yeah.
But the one thing I always managed to keep in was alcohol. And I always drank. This is hilarious because my husband and I used to do this. I always drank, as did he during this, we drank gin because it was made from juniper berries and therefore it was not gluten containing. So we felt like it fit within the parameters of the cleanse. Anyway, that's an aside. The crazy things that we do to justify drinking. Right now, of course, in hindsight, I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, like I worked so hard.
That might have been a problem. I looked back I looked back through a My Fitness Pal or something that I had where I was on a cleanse. I must have been on a cleanse or something, and I had literally saved calories for the champagne I knew I was going to have. Like I literally did nothing but drink champagne several days.
As your cleanse?
For my client, yes. Like what? Who does that? And I'm like, I'm an intelligent person. But it's so true. And what you said about like Googling the am I an alcoholic? You will always, there's that confirmation bias. You will always find what you're looking for or not looking for. And even me, which I can say 100%, if you want to call me an alcoholic, whatever, like I hit rock bottom. I went to all those places. Yes, 100% it was true for me. But there were still a couple of those things, and there still are a couple of things that didn't line up for me. I don't come from a line of alcoholics. Nobody in my parents, my grandparents, none of it was there. And so for me, that didn't hold true, and that was enough. That one check mark was enough for me to say, oh no, it must be okay. Or, I'm able to stop for periods of time. I couldn't say stop, but I was able to stop for periods of time. And so if there's enough justification, and you're right, if you are Googling that, at the very least, it's probably worth taking a look at. Yeah. And I think we're asking the wrong questions too. I think that we're in this kind of pivotal point right now where people are questioning everything in the world, but we're not questioning the things that matter. And like you said, the gluten, the dairy, the parabens, there are so many things we're told all the time. Be on your anti-inflammatory diet, but still have your glass of wine. We're not actually told, this is actually what it does to you. This is actually the link to cancer. This is actually what happens. And the real questions are, is this good enough? Yes. Is waking up hungover good enough for me anymore? Is feeling this way, feeling shame, or whatever is bringing you to that Google search, is this good enough for me anymore? Does that mean you have to quit completely? No, it just means trying to ask some questions and take a look at it and have some informed consent over the choices that you're making.
Yeah, 100%. I say that all the time. I wish I had gotten to that point sooner where I recognized that the question I was asking was the wrong question. The question is not, is it bad enough? Is it bad enough for me to make a change? The question is this life good enough the way it is? Could this be better? And that's really the message that I want to deliver to people. If you are listening to this podcast and you're even remotely questioning your relationship with alcohol, just ask yourself that question, and open up your mind and get curious around it to the possibility that life without alcohol might actually be better. Because I mean, I don't know about you, Emily, but I did not think it was going to be better. I thought it was going to be 1,000 times worse when I didn't drink alcohol. I thought I was going to miss it. I would feel deprived. I was going to get excluded from, all kinds of things. It was going to be so difficult to navigate my social life, my professional life, all of that stuff. And listen, it's not easy. We both know that. It's not easy, especially in the beginning. There's lots of hard work that you have to do. But my experience anyway, and I want to hear your take on this, but my experience has been that my life without alcohol is infinitely better than my life was with alcohol. I'm still 3 years almost into it. I'm still having these surprises where I'm like, God, I can't believe, this is available for me. Things that I just had no idea were missing are now there and really obvious for me. And I get that, it's going to be hard for somebody to believe this until they've experienced it for themselves. But you've got my testimony right now on that. And I would love to hear what your experience has been on that too.
100% thought it would be a total death sentence. And I remember meeting someone a couple of years before I stopped drinking who didn't drink, and we were out and I was like, wow, I could never do that. Like those words came out of my mouth. I could never do that. And thinking like that doesn't look fun. I didn't think you could have fun, have friends. I didn't think you could do anything without it. I mean, I really thought it was necessary for anything. And what I realized is that I had just made it that way. The fun really wasn't about the drinking, but I was always drinking with the fun. And, the relaxing, like once I took the alcohol away, the stresses I was drinking over actually turned out to not be that stressful. Like the alcohol was actually adding to it and then adding additional problems because then I wasn't able to use the tools that actually work, like exercise. I'd be hungover from my workout. My health was declining. I wasn't present in conversations with my family. So it was just adding to the noise, adding to the problems. And it was really hard to see. It's so hard to see when you're in it. Because when things look okay, your job's fine, your family's fine, everything's fine, it's really hard to see that it's a problem. But for me, I think the fact that I did have all those rock bottom things happen, I did have the DUI, I got arrested, all the stuff, I was in the hospital. That made it almost easier for me socially so people were like, oh, well, that makes sense why you stopped. And we support that. And I think what's hard, especially when I work with women, is like, you have to have a reason. And you don't have to have a reason. And that's something to look at. Like, isn't it insane that we have to explain why we are not using a drug? Because we don't go sit with our friends and we all whip out cigarettes, and if you don't whip one out, they're like, oh my God, why aren't you smoking? Did you give it up? Are you giving it up forever? Yeah. That's ridiculous, but that's exactly what we do with alcohol.
Yeah.
Are you pregnant?
Yeah.
Did you get a DUI? Are you on a cleanse? There has to be a reason, because why would any sane person actually give it up?
Yeah, no, that's
you're battling all those things.
Yeah. And I think it's worth talking about, because I think, listen, I was part of the problem with that too. So when I think back to when I was still drinking, I mean, I was one of those people who probably said all of those things at some point to someone, except maybe the, are you pregnant? Because I have a personal sensitivity on that particular issue. So I probably said that, but I would have said almost everything else there. So I get it. I mean, it's just, we're kind of programmed to do it. It's how we roll. But I think it's important on this issue to get some mindfulness too. And just, once people listen to us having this discussion about it, they might think twice before they say that to somebody. Because it happens to me all the time. It probably still happens to you, although most people, probably more people are aware of the fact that you don't drink maybe than me, just because I'm a little newer into it than you are. But, and I didn't write a best-selling memoir. But, when I go out, I still get that question sometimes from people. And, I'm now at the point where I'm just so confident I just say I don't drink, I don't care to explain it. It's nobody's business. But certainly in the beginning, I felt like I had to almost get defensive on it. I felt myself like trying to come up with these explanations for why I didn't drink, because, I wanted to make sure that people weren't assuming that I was like, had been sleeping on the sidewalk with a, paper bag and a Mickey, like I wanted to make sure that I didn't, give them kind of a false perception of the reasons why I stopped drinking. But at the same time, there was a piece of me that was like, why does this matter? Why do I even have to tell you this? And especially because I was just owning the fact that this was a choice. And that's the thing that I love the most about this naked mind. And again, I'm like you, however you get to becoming alcohol free, I am all over that. Whatever gets you there is amazing. And whatever helps you stay there is amazing. But what I really want for the women that I work with, as I know you do with your clients, is I want women to get to a place where they feel true freedom from alcohol. And true freedom from alcohol is when you are legitimately feeling like you just don't want it. And that's where I am with it. I just don't want it. I feel no deprivation around it. I feel like it's a positive choice for me. My life is a million times better without it. I have no interest in going back to where I was before, and I'm not questioning it all the time. But it is a shame that I have to explain any of that to people when someone offers me a drink and I say no thanks. And so if you're listening to this and you're sweating a little bit because you feel like you've done that before, first of all, there's no judgment
It's
here.
okay.
I've done it. So
all.
has Emily. But just think about it, think about it going forward, because it really puts that person who's trying to make a positive choice for them, for whatever reason they're trying to make that positive choice, it puts them in a really awkward position around that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to notice too, like, because I still get comments. Like I posted something the other day about my homeschool classroom and like all the names and schedule. And someone said, "Oh, time to get some wine." It was someone who obviously doesn't know that I drink or don't drink. And I was like, "Oh, I'm 4 years sober." And it's not to say like, "Oh, you idiot, how could you say that?" And it was like, "Oh, we'll go buy some shoes instead." But it's just to be mindful of how we're using it. It's like, oh, again, it's that thing where, oh, you've got this schedule, you got all the kids, you better go drug yourself. And being more mindful about those things that we're telling each other and telling ourselves, again, and that goes into the whole, the mommy wine culture and how it is so insidious with mothers, especially during this pandemic. And again, I think, again, for people listening, like, I'm not anti-drink, I'm not anti-drinker. Most of my friends still drink. My husband still drinks, and it's a very personal choice, but it's also something that I'm very passionate about talking about, because no one was talking about it back when I was, drowning myself in bottles of wine every night, that it might be a problem. It might be something you want to take a look at. If it's not a problem for you, if you have a glass here and there, you can take it or leave it. It doesn't come up, you don't think about it, then you're good. But if there had been a voice out there, I might have listened to it.
Yeah, 100%. And this is a perfect segue into the mummy culture, kind of the mummy wine culture thing, which is, we're going to talk about it a bit because you and I are both passionate about this. You're just a friggin', I think you're just so amazing in this arena. I just think you're in it. And I love your like no bullshit approach to this and how you just call it like it is. And I really appreciate everything you do on that front. I am cheering you on around this one. This is not something that I have talked a lot about. I haven't been very vocal about it. My kids are older now, as you know, so I have a 16-year-old and an almost 17-year-old, so I'm kind of out of it. But that mummy wine culture, I really believe like it turned a corner just as I was having my kids. So I had my kids in 2003. And as you know, my kids are 7 months apart. So I was right in it, in terms of just being overwhelmed with babies right out of the gate. And you obviously were too, because you just kept on having them. So the two of us were in that zone where it was like kids all the time. And what I saw around that, it was normal for me because it was all I knew about mummy culture. I mean, I just became a mom in 2003, and whatever was around me was what was the way it was supposed to be. And what happened to be around me then was this new drive. I think it coincided nicely with the alcohol industry's recognition of the fact that there was this huge untapped segment of the market, which was women, and they hadn't, they really hadn't done any directed marketing at women. And that started around that time, and started seeing like the fancy labels on wine bottles with high-heeled shoes on them, and Mama's Little Helper and Mommy Juice and that kind of thing come out as branding for wine. But as well with that came this push through social media around the normalization of drinking as part of mom culture, this like rosé all day, and oh my God, there's just so many of them. But that happened at the same time for me. And I think that really fueled me for a long time, unconsciously. I didn't know it was doing that, but it was just basically it was just telling me that it was okay and I was normal, and this, because by all of those memes and standards out there in social media, I was normal. And to be honest, at that point in time, I hadn't hit that tipping point yet. So those were, those were my early years, and alcohol really wasn't a big problem for me. But when I look back on it now, I think, well, how much did that contribute to me and the pace at which I went down that slippery slope and where I ended up at, and it's just such a dangerous thing. I totally think it's worth talking about, because I think, again, there's no judgment here. I'm not judging anybody who's posting memes. I used to post the memes. I know, Emily, you're not judging the people posting the memes. You used to post the memes. But what we want to, really highlight, I guess, is just how this becomes a problem for some women. So it may not be a problem for you because you're still moderating drinking really successfully. But so many women are not. I mean, the rates around women and alcohol are shocking in terms of what's going on out there.
And it's really no surprise. And like you said, I started having kids around the same time, that now in the last 15 years, alcohol, rates of substance abuse disorder and rates of dying from alcohol-related causes have skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And I think there's a very, very exact correlation there. And unfortunately, kind of like cigarettes back in the day, which is not that long ago, we're going to come to this critical mass where we're going to be catching up and being like, oh, shoot, you guys better stop smoking, because guess what? All these women who we told it's good for you, it's healthy, it's good for your lungs, now you have lung cancer. Yeah. And we're realizing that this marketing, it is this very insidious belief that, you know what, if you drink wine out of the can and that's your thing, like, good, that's great, good for you. But having it at the checkout right next to the candy at the pharmacy, it's reprogramming your brain to think that it's benign, to think that it's not a drug. It is a drug. It's categorized as a drug. Alcohol is a drug. And just like if it was a pack of cigarettes sitting there, or a jar of marijuana, or what, I don't know if they put it in jars, yeah. I'm not, but, or, any illegal drug, because alcohol kills more people than any illicit drug and all illicit drugs combined. And when you think about that, then you start thinking, okay, what if you pictured it as a cigarette box or as a joint or whatever? Then how do you feel about promoting it that way? How do you feel about, making it pink and saying that, mommy smokes because I cry, or whatever, this might be meth or something, like all these memes and these sayings that are so funny because it's been so normalized. And when you really think about it, like if that's your humor and you're sharing that between adults, that's one thing. But what if you're sharing it with someone who is on that slippery slope? Yeah. And gosh, I don't feel like I should be drinking every day. I feel like I'm waking up and I'm craving a drink. Yeah. But gosh, I'm getting all these memes from my friends, so they must be drinking too, and it must be okay.
Yeah. Well, statistically, the truth is you are sharing it with people who are on the slippery slope. Like you and I know, I mean, we're in this, this is our thing. This is what we love to do. This is what we're passionate about. You and I know that anybody who's posting those memes is necessarily ending up in the feed of someone who's on that slippery slope, because so many women are on it. And so I just think it bears some thinking. And that's really all that I wanted to do in this podcast around this issue, is just get people thinking about how often they're doing this. I mean, as I said, I have done it in the past. I had a glass, it was a mug that said, there's a chance this is wine. You probably had one too. And there was a good chance it was wine for a while there. I still have it, but it's coffee now that's in there. And I was telling you this story before we started recording. I had a conversation that was interesting last night with my husband, who does still drink, like your husband still drinks. He doesn't drink that much, but he drinks, and most of my friends drink, and that's totally fine. And I go everywhere where people are drinking, and I'm fine with that. Yep. It's just my normal, and I don't talk about it. It's fine. But we were talking last night about this mummy wine culture, which is something I've for some reason, never really had a discussion with him about. I guess because he's not getting the memes about rosé all day and, homeschooling brought to you by, Prosecco or whatever. So we had a conversation about it last night because I knew I was going to be talking to you today about it. And I asked him if he remembered this onesie that we saw, I don't know, like when we had little kids, I think, because we thought it was really funny. We probably still had a baby at the time. And I actually think we considered purchasing it. And it said across the front, "Mummy drinks because I cry. And he said, oh yeah, no, I totally remember that. And I said, geez, just think about what that meant, what message that is sending, which I would not have thought about at the time, obviously, but what kind of a message is that sending? First of all, it's sending the message that you are incapable of parenting effectively. Like you need an aid here. You can't do this on your own. You need wine. And second of all, it's telling the kid that it's the kid's fault. It's just such a crazy message. And the fact that we thought it was funny is crazy. Now, the thing that happened last night, which I was telling you earlier, is that my husband's response to that was, oh, Wendy, lay off. It's just a joke. And I said, that's the problem. That response is the problem, right? That is the problem. And it's that we're all just out there calling this a joke. And I get it. It's meant to be a joke. That's the intention. But unfortunately, the consequence of it is that I think it's having this, overall, this really big impact on women, especially gray area drinkers, women who are in that area. And just to define gray area drinkers, because you touched on it earlier, but probably again, there's some people listening who don't know what we're talking about when we talk about gray area. Gray area is really, I think, a really useful term in the world that you and I are in that it effectively leaves the definition of problematic drinking up to the person who's drinking. So it's like okay, I am not by most definitions an alcoholic or a problematic drinker. Society probably wouldn't view me as a problematic drinker. I have lots of friends who drink the same amount as I do, maybe even more. But for me, it doesn't feel right anymore. I'm starting to question it. And so that term was coined years ago, and I think it's a great term. And it's certainly where I use it all the time because I think it's a helpful thing for women to know that there's a name for it. And that it's worth looking into, it's worth taking seriously. So if you find yourself in that gray area drinking zone where you're starting to ask yourself, like, is this really, is this worth it anymore? Is this taking more than it's giving now? That's kind of that gray area drinking zone.
Yeah, and the fact that the gray area is always on the way to the rock bottom. And so if you get to that, like, everyone's going to be in that point at some point. One who is a drinker in that gray area. And so it's all very progressive, and that, it's all about being mindful of it, because if it's coming up this way, it's probably going to get worse if you don't deal with it. Yeah. And when you said about the onesie, again, that is the problem, is that it is a joke, and that if you Google like mommy drinks because I cry, you will get like 800,000 suggestions of things. I mean, we're so infiltrated with all of these messages and all these ideas that it takes away our power, really, as women. Like, again, you can't handle this. You need the substance to do everything that you do. You need to be drinking wine all day. There's beer called day drinking beer, or day drinking wine, I think, in a can, where you need this, and you really do feel like you need it. Even if physiologically you don't like wake up and need to drink, society's telling you that this is what women do. This is what moms do. And now, and you can echo this back with me, is these kids that we had back when this mommy wine culture was taking off are now 16, 17, and are on social media with us and are seeing these messages. And how damaging is it to a teenager who sees their mom posting something that says it takes, a village to raise a child, but a vineyard to homeschool them? Yeah. What does that tell them about their own worth and your own ability? And that's where that was really a big switch for me, because again, I had the DUI, I had all the things, and I had to have a conversation with my family about, I had an interlock in my car, a breathalyzer in my car.
Right.
My oldest was 11. So I always thought I was drinking, my drinking was up here and they were down here, like they didn't really know. And my kids knew everything, and they asked all the questions, like why do they serve alcohol in restaurants if you have to drive? And if it's illegal to drive drinking? And like they asked questions that I was like, that's a really great question. Like things that I'd never thought of. They knew when I had been drinking. They knew what was in my glass at night. Like they know so much more, and they're absorbing those messages. Again, even if you're only trading them between friends, if you're only drinking out of a cup that doesn't look like a wine glass, like they know so much more than they think. And I think that's the message I want to put out there.
Yeah.
It's not about you need to feel ashamed if you drink and you're a mom. No, like have your wine, go for it. What you need to do is have a conversation about it and be informed about it and talk to your, the things you're saying to your kids need to match the behavior that's there. Because it's really damaging to say, like, don't drink, don't do drugs, but mom's got wine in her glass every single night. Like, how do they reconcile that?
Yeah.
And know that they see what's going on. And I know that having gone through it, looking back, hearing from my own children and coming out the other side, let me be your cautionary tale. Like, don't get to that point. Don't get to that point where you're thinking, is it a problem? I'm going to go ahead and Google it. Oh, it's probably not.
Yeah.
Like,
I know that's
questions.
that's my thing too. I'm like, let me be your cautionary tale. Let me be your gray area drinker cautionary tale. Like, you don't need to even get to the place that I got to with this. And I've been talking about this more and more lately, but I always define, because people are looking for the rock bottom, as you said earlier. Like, if I had this kind of objectively horrible rock bottom that I could pull out of my purse for people when they ask me the question as to why I'm not drinking, that would probably be very helpful to me, but I don't have it. And so I talk about how I just had a series of what I call high bottom moments, like these moments that I now look back on, and even at the time they weren't rock bottom enough for me to identify them as high bottom, if that makes sense. Like, they weren't bad enough that at the time I saw them as that, but now when I look back on it and I put them all together, I'm like, oh, that was not good. That should have been a rock bottom. Like, why on earth is that not considered a rock bottom? That particular thing happened. I am so passionate about sharing my story so that I can let other women know that when you get to that point where you start to question it, that is the time to actually start doing some work. Don't look at the memes and look at what other people are doing and say, oh, it's okay, I'm okay. Don't do that. If you're questioning it, trust your gut. As coaches, we are so big on intuition and going with your gut. It's just, we can actually rely on ourselves. We can actually make great decisions for ourselves if we just listen to what is going on inside of us. So I am really, really passionate about that. And I want, I just want to share my story so that other women can see that, I finally got to the point where I realized it was enough. But when I look back on it, I wish I had gotten off the train years and years before I did. I mean, if I could go back and do anything differently, it would just be to go alcohol-free way before I did, to be honest. So I want to talk a little bit, Emily, about the title of your book, your first book, Highlight Reel. Can you give the listeners the full title and tell us why your book was titled what it was?
For sure. So I, again, was that person who looked like they had it all. If you looked at my social media with the gorgeous photos of my gorgeous children, I was successful, I was happy, I have a wonderful husband, we have this wonderful life. And all of those things were true. I do have a wonderful family, wonderful life. But I was also struggling deeply. Again, I was having these problems with the law, I was having problems in my marriage, and I wasn't showing any of those things. And I think we live in this world where we're inundated with all of this happiness and, people's vacations and people's social lives and this missing out and this not good enough. But the reality is most of us aren't even meeting what we're putting out on ourselves. Like, I wasn't matching my own persona.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't even me, right? And so what I really wanted to show was, okay, here was this picture I posted, with this new car I bought. Well, the next day it got towed and impounded because I got a DUI. I look at this picture where I'm dressed up and I have all this makeup and this beautiful dress and I'm smiling. Well, the next day I was in the hospital, with alcohol poisoning. And I had all these examples of what I showed versus what really happened, all those things that ended up on the cutting room floor. And I found that I did this through history, that I was always showing people that I was okay. I was telling the therapist that I was okay. I was just brushing stuff under the rug, and that pile just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I knew that underlying all of it was this idea of just honesty, like not being honest with myself and then not being able to be honest with others with what I was going through. And I knew that didn't work. Like, that just didn't work. And so I wanted to just put it out there because I knew again, I had read all these memoirs, all this quit lit, listened to all these podcasts, and I knew that there had to be someone out there with my story or parts of the same story who would benefit just like I have from all these books too. And so for me, it's just like being real with what was behind all those photos and what's really that everyone's struggling with something. And it's important to talk about it. And you don't have to share all your nitty gritty details. You don't have to write a memoir. You don't have to do any of those things. But to understand that for every beautiful photo, and even me, I'm super honest on social media. I'm not posting everything. I'm not posting every fight I have with my husband or every, there are things with my kids that stay very private because not everything is for public consumption. And so even realize the most authentic, honest social media feeds are still only curating what they want you to see.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, as you know, alcohol is just a piece of what I do around coaching. I mainly work with kind of high achieving women around burnout and balance. And one, of course, when women are maybe it's not as obvious as I think it is, but when women find themselves in burnout or approaching burnout, they're very often at the point where they are relying on mechanisms to help them to escape. So there's a whole variety of mechanisms that women rely on. Everyone's got their thing. And this is something that I want to just put out there. I have yet to meet someone who doesn't have a thing. And so your thing might not be alcohol. It might be food. It might be social media. And it's been a growing piece of my practice. And so much so that I've had to develop programming and do a ton of research around this and learn more as a coach so that I can support women around social media addiction. And the damage that social media and this whole share and compare mentality that we have in social media, the damage that is doing to women's psyches and their souls is terrible. And so I really appreciate that you're so honest about that. And your book is so honest and raw. And I loved it. And I'm one of the women that it spoke to. And I know that there are thousands and thousands of women who have read that book and it has just resonated with them, pieces of it. And your story is different than mine. But I think that's why I wanted to get us together here, is because while our stories are very different in terms of how we got to where we got to, we both got to a place where we were able to finally say to ourselves, like, this is not good enough. This is not where I want to be. And I'm willing to be like the weird one and stop drinking. I'm willing to be like the odd woman out and be the person at the party who's not having a drink. I'm willing to do that. And I think what we both discovered through that process is that that's actually pretty incredible decision to make. And I just want women to know it's available. It's available to you no matter where you are on that slippery slope, no matter how often you're questioning your relationship with alcohol. Here's a question that I asked myself about really right before I made the decision to stop. I tried to moderate a million ways before this, but when I made my kind of last decision, when I finally stopped drinking, I had a really I sat and I thought about it for a long time. I probably had a rough night that I can't remember what preempted it, but I asked myself what the chances were if I did absolutely nothing about this, that 5 years from now, I would be in a better place, a worse place, or the same place with alcohol. And while at that time I didn't know enough about alcohol, I hadn't listened to This Naked Mind, I hadn't done any work around it. What I did know was that it was an addictive substance. And I could, without any real other knowledge, look back on where I was 5 years before and say, based on my own life, it was pretty damn certain that 5 years from now, if I didn't do anything, this was going to be way worse. And I think that's a really great way to look at it, wherever you are on the spectrum and whatever wherever you are in terms of that. If you're questioning your relationship with alcohol and you're wondering whether it's, serving you anymore, ask yourself that question, because it's really eye-opening. Like we need to start being preventative about this instead of waiting until we're at the place of last resort with it.
And we're in such a culture of wellness and prevention that alcohol should totally be part of it. And I think too, when you're looking at the future, like alcohol will always be there. So you can say like, drinking's not working for me right now. You don't have to ever say forever. Yeah. There's always going to be that party. There's always going to be the happy hour. There's always going to be the pool party. There's always going to be the social night, the whatever. That bottle of wine's going to be in your cabinet. Yeah. you never have to say forever to reevaluate it right now.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll go back to it and take it or leave it. Maybe you won't, but you never have to say forever. And I think that's really important. It's an important way to take your power back. And I'll say to people too, like, I can have a drink whenever I want. I just don't want to.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I think
Yeah.
that that's the thing about This Naked Mind that probably resonated with both of us, is the fact that the whole approach around alcohol is treat it like an experiment. Like, how do you actually know that this is going to be so bad? You've never done it, and that's really what hooked me in. And that's what gave me the confidence to say, like, I need to give this some time, because I actually don't know. I don't know that this is going to be horrible. And so I just committed to that, just to giving it some time. And for me, it was just 30 days at the beginning. And I just slowly extended that. I never made a commitment. It took me probably 18 months to get to a place where I felt pretty confident that I would just choose to not drink anymore, ever. But for the first year and a half, and I tell my clients this, I did not do that. I was not committed to that at all. I just kept saying, you know what, this is still pretty great. And actually it seems to be getting better. So I owe myself like another 30 days. Let's see what happens in the next 30 days, instead of thinking.
I was always holding off, right, for that next thing. And that kept me trapped for a long time. Like, I knew deep down that I had to stop eventually. I just knew that. That's where it was going. Like, it was going nowhere good. But I kept having to wait, because there was that birthday party coming up. There was that trip. And there was a trip we had to Munich for Oktoberfest that was coming up the following year. And I kept thinking that, like, I can't quit now, because I'm going to be drinking in Munich. And I finally, talked to someone who said, okay, you have to stop your dying. Like, there's nowhere lower to go. Like, you've been in the hospital, you've been arrested. And I did have to stop. And she said to me, she's like, that you can just not drink from now until then, and then decide if you drink in Munich.
Yeah.
And that was just, I know it sounds simple, but that was a concept that I just was like, oh yeah, like, I don't have to decide forever today. And guess what? By the time I got to that trip, I did not want to drink. They had amazing 0.0 non-alcoholic beers in Munich we had the best time. I remember all of it. Like, it was the probably favorite vacation that I have ever had. It was the first I had sober at Oktoberfest in Munich.
So
like, oh my God, how can you do that sober? But had I waited, what would that have looked like? I don't know. Would I have survived until then? I have no idea. But you don't have to hold out until it's bad.
That is that's such a great story. It's weirdly have a similar story where we were going to Italy, to wine country, which was my drink of choice, was red wine. So we were going to Italy, and we had rented this place, and literally in the vineyards of Tuscany, with my kids. And we went every year. We travel with my kids up until COVID. We've been taking my kids. We usually home swap, and we go to Europe for a couple of weeks. And I have a lot of memories from those trips that are amazing, but I also have a lot of memories around alcohol and the role that alcohol played in those vacations, which is pretty typical. You go on a vacation, you drink more, right? And that vacation, I was really nervous about, but it was an absolutely amazing vacation. I did not feel deprived at all, because I was at the right place when I went. And the most amazing thing is that my kids look back on that, and if you ask them what their favorite trip is, they're gonna say that one. They're gonna say it was the trip to Italy. And I have to believe that part of that is because I was actually present for the entire trip. I was there. I was in it. I wasn't trying to escape. So I love that. And thank you for sharing that perspective, because I think that's really helpful for people to know that, you don't have to commit to it forever. And you don't have to worry about what the next thing is that's coming up. Just do it for today, or do it for the month, or, just give yourself the opportunity to see whether it might in fact be something that you might actually want to choose, as opposed to have to do. Listen, Emily, we are at the end. I don't want to keep you for much longer. I know that you have exciting plans to go to the movies today for the first time in a long time.
I know, like, I can't even stand myself. I'm so excited.
That is very exciting. So I won't keep you very long, but what I do want to do is I want to make sure that we talk about the programming that you have coming up. I know that you have just started a really cool thing with a bunch of other sober mom coaches. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I started it's called the Sober Mom Squad. And we actually started this speaking of COVID, the pandemic hit. And I had a lot of clients coming to me who were saying, gosh, I thought I was a social drinker. Well, now I'm home all the time and I'm drinking a lot. So clearly I'm not. What should I do? So I had a lot of women reaching out to me. And So I kind of took a poll of my Instagram audience, like, how can I help and who wants to help me? So I had a few other friends, Jen Elizabeth, Celeste Yvonne, Jessica Landon, Michelle Smith, who are also, in the sober community, in different realms, recovering from different things. And we're like, let's do something. So let's throw some meetings together. So we created this free Facebook group. We started having just a virtual meetup on Zoom, just like this, on Zoom on Wednesdays. That was it. And it just started growing and growing. And like all of a sudden we had like 1,000 women in this group. And so we were like, okay, we need to do something to like be able to actually serve this many people without just one Zoom at one time of the week. And so we launched a membership program. And so we'll have meetings, numerous meetings during the week, at least 2 every day. We'll have a forum that's not on Facebook for, just for privacy reasons, for women to ask questions. We'll have group coaching. We'll have one-on-one coaching. We'll have master classes, which you're going to actually do this September master class. I'm really excited about that. We'll have just a ton of offerings, resources, links to like non-alcoholic beverages, podcasts, a whole library of information and a community, and not just for sober women or alcoholics or whatever. It's for moms who want alcohol to not be the focus of their family.
Yeah.
So it's taking the wine mom culture out of the moms and, making a community. So that's what we're doing. And we've got some, we were able to offer a scholarship program for women who can't afford it. And we've got great sponsors to help sponsor so we can continue the free meeting every week. I'm really excited about it. It launches tomorrow. Sober Mom Squad.
So it's the Sober Mom Squad, and I'll make sure that information is in the show notes with this podcast if anybody's looking for it. And you can find Emily on Instagram at Highlight Real Recovery. I really encourage you to follow her because she's a badass on there, and I love it. I love the fact that last week you got blocked by Instagram for calling somebody out on something.
I know.
Good for you. You know what?
Now that I'm unblocked, I'm glad about it. But yeah, it's a little stressful.
I know, but good for you. I mean, you got it. It's about keeping it honest, right? And I really appreciate what you do. And thank you so much for sharing your story and for coming and talking to me today. It's been so much fun having you here. And maybe someday we'll be able to do this again and have a chat about. There's probably so much you and I can talk about.
Oh, definitely. Thanks, Wendy.
You're so welcome. Thanks, Emily.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. To be sure you don't miss any upcoming Bite Size conversations, subscribe now to this podcast. For more balance and wellness tips or to connect with me, visit my website at wendymccallum.com. That's WENDYMCCALLUM.com.